at that, but I am getting a haircut this morning after our podcast. So
nice. That's
myself go out and get a haircut.
There you go. Get yourself a little treat too.
Yes.
Why not?
No.
A donut.
It's in the mall, so I make a donut or a pretzel, something like that.
There you go.
Welcome back to the Love That Journey Mama podcast. This is episode 2. We're going to be talking about our birth stories, and we hope you enjoy. So cheers, Mama.
Cheers.
Woo.
Everyone have a different mug today except for me.
I just have whatever my husband brought me.
I like yours, Ashley. That's
Thanks. My cousin.
Oh, it's a hedgehog.
Are those your drawings on there?
No, I should do something like that. This is from that like Swedish store by that Swedish brunch place in the city.
Oh,
do you know that one? Trey Kroner.
Yes.
I used to go, so I went to North Park University for like a year, and it was right across the street from Trey Kroner, and we used to go there all the time for breakfast.
So good.
Yes, very good.
So we're going to do a little opening segment. This is something we hope to do at the start of each podcast. It's going to vary depending on what we feel like talking about that week. But this week, Nicole is going to just share how her week's been, and hopefully those of you out there can relate. So what's going on?
All right. So we're all about being transparent and as honest as we can be. So earlier this week, we had set the date to record this Friday, and I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to have the energy to do it? Because I have been suffering from the absolute most debilitating depression, and I have no idea why. So I texted both of you, and I was like, I don't know if this is something I should talk about. And I think all three of us had decided that this was something that other people can possibly relate to. And it's just the raw honesty of motherhood, not even motherhood, just being an adult and just dealing with life. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to talk about it a little bit and just try to work towards ending the stigma of feeling depressed. So I've been feeling extremely depressed for the last 2 weeks. I don't know why. People are like, what's wrong? How can I help you? What's the matter? I don't know. I really just woke up one day, and I know the winter is a huge struggle for me in and of itself. I kind of go into the winter preparing for some bouts of depression here and there. It has not been this bad in years. I don't know. I really don't. I don't know, but I just wanted to share that with everybody that, if you're dealing with it, it's normal. I'm dealing with it. And, I spent the entire day in bed on Friday for absolutely no reason. I mean, I'm fine, just depressed and just trying to work through it. So I just wanted to be able to share that, and hopefully other people can relate. And I'm sure you can hear my dog growling at me under the desk right now. Vito, shush.
And I think what it shows too, the fact that, you're here today doing this, or, you've been feeling that way for a few weeks. So you probably were even feeling that way when we recorded the first podcast. So, I think it shows that there is so much, strength behind people struggling with anxiety and depression. Maybe people that don't struggle with it view it in a certain way, or that, that it's always that you can't get out of bed, but it's sometimes you can really just work through whatever you need to that day, but you are struggling deeply inside. And, if people are more transparent about that, then maybe we can be more understanding of when. And
one of the things too that I noticed that has happened, that I've just heard people in general say, and then we could even say about you, Nicole, right now, is well, you don't seem depressed. You don't look depressed. You're smiling, you're chatting, you seem fine. And it's there's so much behind depression that on the surface you look totally okay, and you could be struggling a lot internally, but it's just you know, in your mind, like, I need to, like, especially as a mom, right? Like, I gotta get up, I gotta feed these kids, I gotta make sure they're okay and get them off to school, and, you know, gotta make sure there's food on the table. Like, you don't have the luxury of just moping around all day in bed. Like, there's life, right? Like, you still gotta function. And I think that's a big thing that always has bothered me as someone who struggles with depression on and off, is people being like, well, you seem okay. Everything seems fine.
Yes.
Like, and it's just like, yeah, I have to seem okay because I don't have the luxury to not, you know, be a functioning adult. So
I think that's part, I was trying to reflect. I think a lot of it's just chemical. It's the winter. But I think also that is a huge part of what leads up to the crash, is holding it together for so long, pretending like you're not suffering from depression, going to work, doing your job, attending presentations, cleaning the house, taking care of the kids. Like, pretending is taking energy. That takes energy. So then I feel like I just hit a point where I'm like, whew, and it just all came crashing down. Like, I am not okay. I am exhausted. I actually just took the last couple of days off of work because I was like, I need a mental health break. And then that spirals into anxiety. I'm like, I'm going to get fired because I took 2 days off of work. Like, you know, it's just a mess, but I just need to focus on myself. And I think what Ashley said is, like, being able to talk about it along the way would probably prevent the huge crash down. Like, if I could go into work and be like, oh, hey guys, I'm going to be quiet today and just like hang to myself, like whatever, and not feel bad about that, I could reserve some of my energy to help myself work through things. You know, if I can be honest with my family members and things like that, like at a family function, and not have to be like, oh, you know, and try and preserve some of that energy, I don't think there would be as big of a crash.
Yeah.
And maybe something you girls could share about in the future, I'm just curious, is like, although I could see some benefits to working from home on days that you're struggling, like, you know, you just have a quick lay down in your bed, but also, do you feel that you don't take as many sick days because you're like, oh, well, I'm already at home, I could just like get it done? And then is there this whole issue of people not taking enough mental health days because they work from home? So that's something I'm curious about.
I mean, I've purposely, as of literally just this year, like started last month in January, I told my husband too, I was like, I'm making a point, because I do get a pretty good amount of PTO with my job. And I mean, as a mom of 2 young kids in daycare, I'm always paranoid, like, I need to save those days because they're probably going to get sick, because they're always getting sick. But like, I need to start making, you know, my PTO for me, at least in some regards. So starting in January, and I did my day earlier this month. I'm making it a point to take one mental health day every month. Even if I'm totally feeling fine that day, it's like just to have that day, like this past, like in January. So my mental health day, I actually went to the spa because I had a bunch of gift cards saved up. So I went and got a massage and a facial, which was like beautiful. And then I was thinking, like in February, I was like, well, I even just want a day where I can just like sit at home and play video games, not clean the house, not do, you know, projects around the house. Cause that's what I always do, right? Like anytime I have time to myself, I'm like, I gotta like clean the oven and, you know,
reorganize
like the kids' clothes or something. It's just like, I'm always doing something. And I feel like that's what breaks us down too. So I'm like, I just need a day where I'm going to just sit in my pajamas and like not get off the couch and watch TV all day, even if I'm feeling fine, but I just need that day to recharge. So that's my goal for 2023 is one day a month. It's having like just me day, just me, just my time.
All about Sam. Yes.
I think that's great. I might adopt that because
I should
seriously lacking on me time. I think that's also part of it, is you're just spewing your energy everywhere else and not, you know, filling up your own cup, which I've been pretty good at in the past, but yeah, I haven't been great at that. But I am getting a haircut this morning after our podcast. So
That's
myself, go out and get a haircut.
There you go. Get yourself a little treat too.
Yeah.
Why not?
No. A donut.
It's in the mall, so I make a donut or a pretzel, something like that.
There you go.
Yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to
cheers to that. Cheers to self-care.
Yes, and donuts and yes, I agree. Well, thank you for sharing So honestly, about how you're feeling, I'm sure so many people, especially this time of year, are feeling certain types of ways, not knowing why. Maybe they just feel that way. So
Yeah, it's rough. And we're going to Florida in a week. We leave in a week. So I'm looking forward to that.
good.
But
The sunshine will definitely help.
yeah,
Yes.
the warm weather.
So, are you guys ready to talk birth stories?
Woo!
Yeah.
Major shift in topic.
Okay, the goal of today's podcast, right,
We're
is
here
our
for
birth
it.
story.
So, Sam, you got 2 birth stories to share.
I'll try to be quick because I know I like to ramble.
Okay, I like your rambles.
Oh, thanks. All right, I guess I will kick us off with birth stories. So I'll start. Baby number 1, Julian. So I had Julian in September of 2020. So he was due. Just a pre story here. Both my kids were born exactly a week early ahead of their due date. And both of them were over 9 pounds. So I make giant babies.
Wow.
Giant baby.
Yes. So starting off with Julian, right? So my entire pregnancy, I was measuring ahead. Like they were all telling me like, he's going to be big. He's going to be big. He's going to be big. And, so I was a little worried just going into it, right? Cause your first birthing experience, you're like, oh God, like they're already all telling me he's going to be a giant baby, which just added to the extra panicky feeling. But funny story with him is, so it was peak 2020 COVID, right? So I had a scheduled induction that was going to be 6 days before my due date because they were like, he's huge. We need to get him out early. So I was like, okay, fair enough. So I was going to be induced on the 29th of September. He was due October 5th. So about a week early. But before that, they wanted me to go in 2 days before my induction to get my COVID test. I had to be tested. And then basically they were doing, it was like back when, it was like just PCR tests, 2 days. And then they were like, you get tested, go home and quarantine for those 2 days because any signs of, COVID when you come to the hospital, like we can't let your husband come. Like it was like a whole ordeal. Right. So, I got tested, came home so at the waiting center of it was like Sunday afternoon. I was going to be induced Tuesday morning. Sunday afternoon, I'm in the waiting area getting my COVID test, and I start to have what I think are contractions, but I wasn't sure because everything I had read, contractions are supposed to be like in the front, right? Like where your uterus is. I was getting back pain.
Exactly.
Like severe lower back pain. So I go through my COVID test, get in the car. My husband was waiting for me. And on the drive home, I'm like, I think I might be starting to have contractions, but like, I don't know. And as a, little tidbit to the story, I had tested, what is it? Like GB, the group B strep positive, whatever. Like when they do your thing, like, so they had told me ahead of time, like, oh, if you start to have contractions, you're going to need to just come in because we got to start antibiotics for you just in case. So I knew ahead of time, like I couldn't wait until, like the last minute to go in. So we get home, my back pain's getting worse and worse and worse. And my husband's like, you should just call the hospital, or call the doctor, see what they say. So I call, she's like, yeah, just because you need the antibiotics, you should come in, get checked. Cause that way, at least we can get you hooked up to the IVs and whatever. And we'll see where you're at. I'm still convinced, right, that it's like not really labor. Cause like, I was like, oh, my water hasn't broke. I'm not like, my uterus isn't in pain. It's all my back. But my husband in the meantime is like throwing our bags in the car. He's like, we got to go. So I'm like, all right. So luckily we're only like a 10-minute drive from the hospital. We get there. They were like, do you want a wheelchair? And I was like, no, I'm fine. And I like waddled myself into the birthing center. They check me. I'm fully convinced they're going to be like, everything's fine. Go home. They're like, oh no, you're 6 centimeters. Like this baby's coming. And I was like, oh, okay. Completely unprepared. Right. And she's like, yeah, you're not leaving without a baby. We were like, oh, wow, this is happening. And then like immediately, right. It's just like the mad rush. Like, do you want an epidural? And I was like, I guess so. So they gave me epidural. Within an hour, I was at 8 centimeters. OB comes in. She's like, all right, we got to break your water. Things are happening fast. So I was like, oh my God. So she breaks my water. And then like an hour after that, I'm fully dilated, 10 centimeters, like ready to go. And I remember a nurse at the time saying, wow, you're like textbook labor, right? Like you're just progressing along, no issues, this baby's coming. And then it all went downhill from there. Basically, I pushed for almost 5 hours and he was not coming out. Like, and I had a mask on for most of it because, you know, COVID. They did end up swabbing me at the hospital because my results from earlier in the day hadn't come back yet. So we had to do another swab of like for the quick test, which came back negative. So I was fine. So when they did the nurse swap, the night nurse was like, okay, you can take your mask off. Like, I'm sure this is hard enough for you as it is. And I was like, thank you. So I'm pushing. They keep saying his head. Apparently he was sunny side up. So he was twisted. So every time, and they said that's why I had back labor, because he was flipped around.
My daughter was sunny side up, but I did not have back labor. That's
okay. Maybe it's not related, but that's what she said. No, so I was like, okay. It could be. But so yeah, so I'm pushing. She keeps saying like, oh, there's his head. I see his head with like all the dark hair. And then boop, back in. Like he was not coming all the way out. Because she kept saying like if he was coming out, she would try to twist him because she thinks that's why he wasn't coming out, because he was flipped. So I remember at one point the OB came in and she was like, we're going to need to do a C-section. There's no two ways about it. You know, you're losing steam. The baby. Oh, and at that point too, there was a meconium leak because he had been for so long without the amniotic fluid that he had pooped, and they were worried about him inhaling the meconium. So they were like, we don't want you to panic, but you know, there was a leak, and like now we're kind of on like a time crunch, right? Because we got to get him out just in case to, you know, monitor everything. So she's like, I'm going to give you a minute to, you know, collect yourself, think about it, whatever. And I remember she left the room and I burst into tears. It was just me and my husband, and I was like, I don't want a C-section. I was like terrified. Like, that's not what I pictured at all, right? Which, as we talked about in the last episode, like nothing's ever what you think it's going to be. So I just cried. Like I had envisioned birth going so differently. And I think it was just hard to be like, hey, we're doing this. So here's like 5 minutes to like collect yourself and be okay with it. And I really didn't want it, but you know, he wasn't coming out. And so I was like, can I just get like 10 more minutes to push? And I pushed with all my might. Every ounce of strength I had left after those like 5 grueling hours, I was just like, it's now or nothing. And I couldn't do it. My body just was
exhausted. I don't know how you pushed for so long. That's amazing.
Girl,
I mean, the nurses were even like, yeah, I remember the nurse telling me, she was like, you're like stronger than you know that you've been pushing this long. Because as you know, first experience, you're like, I don't know how long people are supposed to push for. I was pushing for apparently way too long. So they did give me, you know, time to try, but it was just at the end of the day, he was too big and his head was too big and he was flipped around, and my pelvic area, I guess, is pretty narrow. So it was just not in the cards. So they wheeled me into C-section. At this point, it's like, it was like 12:30, like past midnight. And we had gotten to the hospital at like 4 p.m. So it was a good chunk of time. We get into the C-section room. And at this point, my epidural had worn off. They were giving me a local like general anesthesia. And I don't know if it was just like the full body trauma from pushing for so long or what, but my husband said I passed out on the operating table. They upped my drugs because they were worried about like how many hours it had been since my epidural. And they were like, well, we're about to cut into you, so we need to make sure. So I remember being in like this weird, foggy, hazy twilight, and they wheeled me into the room. And I just remember over and over going, where's my husband? Where's my husband? Where's my husband? Because they wouldn't let him in until I was literally about to be cut open. I don't have any memory of anything. Like the only thing that still sticks in my brain is I remember hearing Julian cry out, and I remember saying, oh, he's okay, and promptly passed out. I have no memory of being in the operating room like at all. And my husband even said,
the best, honestly.
I guess. I mean, it was just such a weird out of body experience because I was like, even looking back now, and I think that was a big thing for me in the healing process afterwards, is I cried a lot, not only because I had the C-section, which I didn't want, but I didn't have any like happy memory tied to the birth. Like, I didn't have any memory tied to the birth. It was very much just like a weird, fuzzy, dream-like sequence. Like I couldn't grasp the realistic anything of it. It was just very weird. And they wouldn't give them to me because I had passed out. I didn't actually get to see my baby until we were in the recovery room afterwards. It was really weird. Like my husband went over and they were showing him, and my husband got pictures of him. Apparently my husband took pictures, brought him over to me, and that's when he was like, you were passed out. Like I have no memory of it. I have no memory of being, you know, like stitched up and everything. And then I remember being wheeled into the recovery room and finally like getting to meet my baby. And I just remember wanting to hold him, and they wouldn't let me hold him yet because I was so drugged up that they didn't trust me to hold him.
Yeah.
And it was really hard. It was a very difficult thing to come to terms with. And I cried a lot after. I mean, I cried a lot in the hospital. I cried a lot after that. And he was, he was stuck in my birthing canal. Like his head was kind of coned. Yeah. Because he had been stuck for so many hours with me pushing. So, that was birth number one.
And for your husband to witness, like,
yes,
I'm sure you and him have talked about it, and Brian and I talked about ours. It's like, it's traumatic for them to watch what's happening to us, and and
not being able to do anything.
Right. And I remember him just saying it was really weird because it's like on one hand, you know, your son is being born on one side of the curtain, and on the other side of the curtain, your wife's like passed out from too many drugs. And it's just like this juxtaposition of like, and it was a really weird, surreal moment. So flash forward to birth number 2. I knew right away that I wanted to schedule another C-section. It was something that a lot of people were like, oh, are you going to try for a VBAC? Vaginal birth after C-section, for anyone who doesn't know what that is. And I didn't want to. I don't know. Like I was so scared of going through that whole process, and because it took forever for my body to heal, right? Because I basically felt like I was hit by a truck from pushing for so long, plus the C-section healing, that I knew I didn't want to put my body through that again. And I was worried from all the trauma of the first one. And I was like, I don't want to go through all this just to have the same experience, especially as I got further along in the pregnancy and they were like, oh, looks like it's another big baby. And I was like, okay, we're doing this.
Forget it.
Don't want to risk it.
Makes sense.
And I still, I mean, it's hard because I part of me wishes that I maybe tried now, because I know that was going to be our last baby, and having the experience of a vaginal birth just to see what my body's capable of, kind of thing. It was more of like just wanting to know how that feels. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know what, I got healthy babies. But so anyway, with baby number 2, scheduled C-section, right? So he was scheduled August 8th because I got to pick the day, and I was like, oh, 8/8, that's kind of a cool, like it would have been 8/8/22, 8/8/22. But this kid had other plans. August 5th, my water broke. And it was a near experience, right? Because with Julian, my water didn't break. They had to break it for me. So I didn't even know what it was, right? And it was 9:30 at night. My husband was already in bed because we had an exhausting day with Julian, which again, so it was a Friday, right? Like Friday was when my water broke. I had planned the C-section for Monday morning because I was like, we'll have one more weekend as a family of 3. Like I'll get to spend all this time with Julian as his last, weekend of being the only kid. And I had all these plans. And then 9:30 at night, Friday, my husband was like half asleep. Julian was in bed. I got up to pee because I was already in bed, got up to pee. And it felt like a water balloon popped. It was really weird because I was like, is that what it is? Like, is that just water break? It was so weird. And I remember kind of nudging my husband, and I was like, I think my water broke, but I'm not sure. And he was like, ugh. And I was like, yeah. So I called my OB, and she was like, okay, one way to test is like lay on a towel for like 15 minutes. And then when you go to sit up, because at first I was like, maybe I just like peed myself a little bit. Like, I don't know, because when you're that late in pregnancy, like you kind of lose control of everything. So I was like, maybe I just peed myself. And she was like, lay on a towel. She's like, and then if you sit up after 10 minutes, and you feel like a gush, she's like, that's how you know your water broke. So I'm like, okay. So I go and grab a towel, lay it on the bed. In the meantime, my husband's like getting himself up because he's like, well, guess I'll go pack the bags just in case. I was like, all right. So I'm like chatting with my sister because I called her because she was going to be the one to come watch Julian if, you know, I really was in labor. And I was like, hey, I think my water just broke, but I feel fine right now. You know, take your time, but I'm just letting you know you might need to like pack your bag and come over. And then sure enough, I sat up from the towel, gushed everywhere. It was like a movie, right? Like I was like, oh, this is what it is. Like it was so much. It's like, and so then I start laughing because I'm like one of those people who just laughs uncontrollably when I'm like panicked and nervous. Yes. So I'm like walking around the house, like giggling to myself, like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And my husband's like, what's wrong with you? We need to leave. And I'm like, but I feel fine. So I call the OB back. I'm like, yes, my water did break, but I'm not having any contraction. What do I do? Because this is completely different than my first birth. And she's like, well, she's like, and she was the on-call OB because, right, it's like 10 o'clock at night at this point.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm going to head into the hospital. You should head there too. You know, just, you know, what, like, if you start feeling contractions, blah, 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 it's really normal. I was like, all right, taking my time. I remember going into Julian's room and I just like silently cried standing over his crib because I like didn't get to say goodbye, which was really hard. And all my plans for our last weekend together was going out the window. So I was like, oh, my baby. And Eric, my husband's like, Sam, what are you doing? He's like whispering from the door, like, we gotta go. So I was like, okay. And oh my God, kind of like what you were saying, Nicole, with the, what was it? Precipitous. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I went from my water breaking at about 9:30. It's like 10 o'clock rolls around, contractions start. And I'm like, okay, I can handle this. Like I remember with Julian, I had contractions for a few hours, right? Before it started to get really bad. No, within like 20 minutes, my contractions were like a minute apart. It was 0 to 100, like go
like
time.
Unbearable. And they don't, you feel like they don't stop.
No. And it was I remember, so we get in the car again, luckily we're only a 10-minute drive from the hospital. So my sister shows up with her bag and I'm just like, hey, I was going to talk to you more about like Julian's routine and everything, but I'm like dying to go. So she's like, don't worry, it's fine. I got it. So we get in the car, get to the hospital at about 10:20 p.m., 10:30 p.m. Full contractions, just like screaming. I was like banging the side of the car door. And I was like, don't break my car. I'm like, I'm going to break your face in a minute. Like, so, yeah. So we get there and apparently they won't give you anything until the surgeon's on site. So because the OB wasn't there yet, they wouldn't give me any type of relief. Yeah. Because it's only a limited time, right? So when they give you the anesthesia, there's only so much time before it wears off. So they won't give it to you until the doctor's at least on the premises because, you know, let's say she gets in an accident or she's stuck in traffic or whatever, and then your anesthesia starts to wear off and it's like, eh. So I remember I was just begging, like screaming for just something relief. And I remember a few of the nurses being like, do you want to just try to like push? And I was like, no. I was like pinching my legs together because I didn't want to go through that, right? Like I was like, in my head, I was like, we had a planned C-section. Everything was going to go swimmingly. I was going to just show up and they were going to be like, here's your C-section. Here's your baby. Yay. Yeah. No, of course not. So I went through the whole full, like I was fully 10 centimeters, fully dilated, like fully effaced, everything. Like literally this kid was like trying to make his way out. And I was like, no. Surgeon shows up at like 11. They finally give me the anesthesia. And I was just like, oh my God. I was like cracking jokes with the nurse, which that was impossible though too, because they were like, okay, hold on really tight. We got to like jam this needle into your spine while you're fully contracting every 30 seconds. Worse. And I was like, there was this little old lady of a nurse. She was a saint. She was just like, hold my hands. And she had to have been like maybe 5 feet tall, like 90 pounds, just like super tiny. And I'm like crunching her hands like, I loved all my nurses. They were fantastic. So if you're a labor and delivery nurse out there, yes, God bless you, because oh my God, like I don't know what I would have done without them. They talked me through everything. I remember, like, there's a whole bunch of consent forms. I had to give verbal consent for everything because I was already so far gone when we got to the hospital that I couldn't hold a pen and sign my name.
Yeah.
So they were like, do you consent to this? Do you consent to this? Do you consent? I was just like, yes, just whatever you need, just help. So Jamie was born via C-section at the last minute. So we get to the hospital at 10:30. He was in my arms at 11:20. It was fast. I mean, from when my water broke to when he was in my arms was less than 2 hours. It was just insanity. He apparently, like, the surgeon told me afterwards, they had to warn me because they accidentally, like, nicked his back. He had a cut because my uterus was so thin. She said it was like butter when she cut it because it was just like, she was not prepared. She's like, that baby was like 2 minutes away from just making his way out.
Coming through.
Wow.
So it was a complete different experience than Julian. But still, neither were easy. It was just very much a whirlwind experience. The one plus side is with Jamie, at least I was like awake and aware and I wasn't in that weird twilighty fog.
And you knew he was coming for the most part.
Yes. And they were able to, bring him over to me right afterwards. And we have pictures and it's like this very like how I pictured it going. But now it makes me sad looking back because I have pictures with Jamie as a baby, like right after, like the whole thing with like the curtain and me with my little hairnet on and they have the little, gooey baby next to me and it's all like, oh, nice pictures. I don't have anything like that with Julian. Like my first picture with Julian was like 12 hours after he was born because there was like such a weird fuzzy time in there. So that's kind of a little sad, but it is what it is, right? Like I have 2 healthy kids and that's all I can ask for. But, fun story though. So yeah, Julian was born 9 pounds, 11 ounces and Jamie was born 9 pounds, 6 ounces. And they were both exactly a week before their due date. So
big babies.
They had
super
plans
babies.
in mind.
And then, that was another reason that I was done because I was like, I'm not going through this again. So
it's a whole roller coaster of emotions.
But you bring up things where it's like, I definitely want to talk about it in the future of, how you deal with changes in your plans to birth and how it can really be an emotional roller coaster that like, I know I texted you guys that I'm like suddenly realizing the reality of my future. With future births and I'm like, yeah, there's a lot to figure out there. Okay, but amazing birth stories. I feel as you were talking, I mean, I knew we could already relate, Sam, and that's why we did after my birth because I'm just like, I've experienced so much of this. My due date was May 27th, which I'm pretty sure, that was a Friday. And I worked that week. I was under the impression I'm somehow going to make it to the last day of school, which like the kids had just a couple more days after the holiday weekend. And I'm like, yeah, maybe this baby's just gonna like make it, and that'll just be so cute that I made it all the way to the end of the school year. Earlier that week, I think that Monday, because it's like you said, you don't know what it feels like to have your water break until it does. So then when other things happen, you're like, is this it? I don't know. And earlier on that Monday, I thought my water had broken in the middle of the school day. And I luckily like my co-teacher was in the room. So I'm like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Go off to this little staff bathroom. I'm like, I don't know what's happening. I'm comfortable and in pain. So I text my principal and I'm like, I think my water broke. I'm not sure. I don't know what to do. And she like comes, waits outside the bathroom and she's like, are you okay? I'm like, I don't know. But I think they kind of reassured me that I would know if that's what was happening. But either way, they sent me home early and then nothing happened. So I'm like, okay, guess I'm fine. Made it through the rest of the week to the due date. And then that Saturday started kind of doing those things they tell you, like go for walks to kind of get labor going. And we always remember like that Saturday we went and checked out a park nearby. We had moved in a couple months ago, so we were trying to like explore the area, check out parks and walk around, places we'll go in the future. We got Dairy Queen. It was a great day. Maybe we have a few more days till the baby's coming. But then that night around 3 a.m, so Saturday into Sunday, I woke up with a few cramps. I'm like, okay, maybe it's like those early contractions. And I told Brian, my stomach kind of hurts. And then all of a sudden, my water broke. Oh gosh. Like at first, it's just this little bit, and then
Right.
it
Yeah.
just keeps coming. No, you can't stop it. And I'm like, okay, my water's breaking. Oh my God. Oh my God. It was just for, I don't know, maybe I put them there just in case, but we had a couple towels on the side. So I like shoved them between my legs. What do we do? And you know, like he's as if it's bleeding out or something. Like you're just panicking.
It feels that way though. I didn't realize the water was in there. It's like
I know. It was like,
crazy.
yeah, way more than I thought.
Yeah.
And I felt like I couldn't move. I was going to keep leaking. So once Brian was more coherent, I was like, okay, we got to get me into the tub or something. We like waddle me to the bathroom with like the towels between my legs. And I called the on-call doctor, and I was under the impression they were going to have me labor at home for several hours. So I call them like, so am I just going to stay here? They're like, no, you need to come in because your water broke. Okay, so this is happening. But because she was past the due date, we were prepared, had all the bags. I even had like this whole snack bag, you know, all the things. I think it was going to take us like 40 minutes or so to get there. And I remember I told Brian, we're going to have to run red lights because this is, you know, I can't just be sitting there. Plus, nobody's out driving right now. So we kind of had that fight at every light because we were getting caught by every single one. I was like, you gotta just go. You can't just sit here.
We get the same fight, Ashley.
Yeah,
just go.
Because they don't feel what we're feeling, right? Like the sense of urgency is like,
Baby's coming.
Yeah, I felt good. Like I wasn't in too much pain yet, but I was having some contractions. I'm like, oh, this is what contractions feel like. This isn't that bad. Because I also had decided for months I'm going to attempt to not have an epidural. Like my friend that she did natural birth, we were like team natural. We're going to try this. And then when I was having the little contractions in the car, I was like, not so bad. Okay. But I was feeling that tension of go. I think we got to the hospital for 4:30, and you know they've got that like middle of the night person there to check people in, and I remember he was just being so relaxed, this guy, and I was so urgent, and I feel like I was so rude to him because I was like, let's go. But you know, anyways, so they get me into the room and everything relaxed, you know. Brian gets in like the comfy chair. And I tell him, prep, just like eat some things so you have the right amount of energy. We don't know what's going to happen here. Hopefully he'll keep that in mind next time because like literally he just ate Twizzlers. Like an entire bag of Twizzlers was like all he ate. Which like caused problems, you know, later on. But we were okay. And then all of a sudden like the real contractions came. And I had one huge one, broke out into full body sweat. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is what it's like. Am I going to be able to do this? I don't know. Because I always told them, I'm not saying no to the epidural, but I just want to like see, can I do it? So I go through one major contraction. I'm like, okay. And then the second one, it started causing me to throw up. I don't know if you guys experienced that. Like
I threw up with Julian, yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of sent me over. I don't think I can like handle being sick with all this. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to need the epidural. And they got me all set up and ready. I'm assuming it's the same, like they have you sitting on the side of the bed and all like, raised up and everything. So they got me into that position and then didn't come. Like, I guess the person got busy with somebody else or there was an emergency. So I got stuck sitting like that for what felt like an eternity. It probably was like 10 minutes. I don't know. I was panicking that I was like, I can't go through another contraction in this way, sitting up in this way and way high up off the ground. So I almost felt like I was trying to hold in the next contraction. I'm like, it can't happen. But then, yeah, got the epidural. But I struggled with, I didn't know this was a thing. I guess the way that it went into me was uneven.
That
because
happened to
you had
me.
that.
Yep.
Yeah, because it kept
Half of
like,
your body is
yes,
numb, and the other half you can feel everything, right?
yes.
I'm like, what is happening? Yes.
And I
Yeah.
kept telling them I am in like so much pain on this one side, and they kept like, flipping me back and forth, giving me more and more. And I felt bad about that too. I'm like, I don't want to be over medicated. This isn't working.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was a struggle. And I feel like from what I remember, it never fully got solved. Like I just was only partially ever out of pain. Um, so yeah, that was from when we got there, like 4:30, and then they wanted me to start pushing around 3 p.m.
Oh,
Um,
geez.
I don't remember. I know Sam, you're talking the numbers. I'm like, man, I don't remember the dilation. But yeah, they told me I was ready to push, so start pushing, and I felt so like I don't know, is incompetent the right word, or like not strong enough, because
Yeah.
everything I was doing, I felt like it wasn't enough. And it's like you have to get the hang of things at first.
Hmm.
But I just felt like they kept trying to guide me, like, do it more like this or that. And they had me try multiple positions, like holding on to ropes, like up on this thing. Um, and then another part, when I was pushing, I was like really straining my face. So they're
Mhm.
like, you have to stop straining your face and push more down there. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay. Then I got obsessed with trying to like not push with my face, that I
You-
wasn't pushing hard enough.
It like messes with you.
Yeah.
Yes. So then I'm like, all right, I gotta push with my face. And I told them. And then one of the nurses heard me at least, and she was like, no, guys, like she needs to do it that way. I wasn't pushing hard enough, I guess. And then they have different like doctors come through. Like, I don't know if it's because of the time of day or whatever, but I kind of kept getting passed off between different doctors and nurse teams. And very similar to Sam, it was like the way my body's constructed and maybe too narrow or something, I would push and like the head would be right there and then like suck back up.
Yeah.
And over again. So that was really frustrating, because I thought I was like getting close to giving birth, and then they're like, go, go, go. And then, yeah, nothing. So one of the doctors, they both talked, like the ones I was kind of passed between, and they're like, we should try to do a vacuum assisted delivery. So they're explaining to me what that is, that versus the forceps delivery. I'm like, okay. And they make you sign all this stuff because it's can have like a bit of a danger to the baby, potential brain swelling, but it's like you feel you're left with no other choice. They're like, this is what we're gonna do. So we said okay, and then I never saw what anything looked like, but all I know is that it failed 3 times, because that's why I ended up with an emergency C-section. And yeah, it's another hard thing with the vacuum delivery is you feel like you are giving birth when the vacuum comes off, because there's like this huge release of suction.
Mhm.
And that was a huge letdown, because I'd be like, oh my God, I finally did it. And then they're like, actually, no, the baby like went back up. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then she was also starting to get turned more into a position that wasn't ideal. So they warned me before the last attempt. They're like, we're going to have to try for the C-section if this last one doesn't work. I'm trying to push so hard. I had like a wet washcloth over my face. I was just like anything I could. Like you say, I'm like those last 10 minutes, you're like,
Just
do
come
it.
out.
Yeah.
Just come out. Didn't work. So they're like, okay, it's going to have to be C-section. And I was so tired by then. I mean, anytime they were like talking to me at that point, like my eyes were always closed. I was so out of it. But yeah, we signed all the papers, or Brian did. And then I went through that same thing as you, where you get that separation from your husband and you're just so stressed out. I need this support person, and they're getting them ready and you ready. And yeah, that's a very stressful time. Plus, I was super out of it as well. And then I ended up like thankfully having the most amazing people on the team, and especially in there I ended up like writing a letter like thanking people, but one of them was the anesthesiologist, because he really just kept me focused and centered. I remember him like looking over me from above because I was just like panicking, you know. I'd never had any sort of major surgery. I was so exhausted because, oh yeah, I didn't mention, just like you, I pushed for 5 hours.
It's
And
exhausting.
yeah, and with a break in the middle. They thought it would be a good idea for me to rest a little, which you can't rest when you're like having contractions.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
So that anesthesiologist really just did his best to keep me, you know, focused and relaxed. And I started, I don't know if you did, like I got sick again on the table.
Okay.
So
I remember asking for like the puke bucket, but I ended
yes.
up being okay. But it's like I had that wave of like, "Ugh," and
Mhm.
I think it's from all of the anesthesia going through your
Yeah.
system.
My
Yeah, all
friend,
that. And I mean, we should probably do a deep dive on like C-sections at one point,
yeah.
but we can't remember much. But it's like, I know they're doing this test to see if you're numb enough,
Yeah.
and they
Mhm.
should keep poking you and poking you. And I'm like, I can still feel that, like, you know, and you're like, am I going to feel this? But yeah, I was so out of it. And something I always tell people too that I struggle with, they've got your arms on those boards
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it was so hard for me to keep my arms like that, like so painful for some reason. Like all I wanted to do was get them down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's honestly mostly what I remember. I wanted my arms down, and I'm like hitting the curtain that separates me from the chaos.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but they got her out smoothly and whisked her away because, with the all those vacuum attempts, they have to monitor the head immediately. She did end up having a mark, that like now with her hair, it's like we can barely see the scar. But yeah, they had to very carefully monitor that and make sure she didn't have any brain swelling. So I think they brought her in for like a second to show me. And then we saw her for like a brief minute a couple hours later as they were transitioning me to the recovery room.
Mm-hmm.
But I was still so out of it. I mean, like we have pictures of it, but um, yeah, I remember that being a very sad moment when they were like wheeling me into it wasn't the NICU, it was like the ICSU or something.
Was it where
Um,
like the between like the C-section and then like your actual like room? It's like that in between
I was in the in
room.
between, and then she was
Yeah.
in a room that was kind of like a NICU, but not
Like a
Okay.
fully.
step underneath that. I
One
think
step under.
I forget what it's called, but yeah, there's like this step under.
Yeah, and that's where they took me, yeah, in transition just to see her. And I remember being so sad of like, what just happened to me? This is not what I planned. I'm so out of it. And then from that, I don't think I saw her for another 15 hours
Oh
because
my
I
gosh.
was on death's door. She was, you know, having to be heavily monitored. And yeah, so there's so much more to say there about the post birth.
Yeah. I
Um,
know, yeah, you're right. I think we could do definitely more on that with Nicole's birth stories. We could
yeah,
talk
for
about more like the
sure.
post birth.
The recovery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just, I mean, I thankfully had an amazing experience and lots of people supporting me, but I don't think that's the case like for everybody. Um, but yeah, she came into the world like a little before 8:30, and thankfully we were reunited after several hours. And then, yeah, recovery. Well,
We'll get into that because
we
that's a
will.
whole other
A
story.
whole other.
Yeah. So it's crazy that Sam and I had a lot of similarities.
A lot.
Yeah, I never knew that there was that many similarities, but that's crazy. I mean, it just
Yeah.
goes to show again that we're not alone, right?
Yeah. And I feel
No.
like I told that second half of it kind of messy, but we can get into that more with, you
Yeah.
know, more hospital stuff. But yeah, so hopefully some people have related so far to what
I
happened to you
think
or what happened to me.
For
Yeah.
sure. And the feelings with it. I mean, your feelings are so valid. I did not have C-section, so I can only imagine how difficult that must have been.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you felt a whole different
Mine
level.
were,
I was gonna say I'm looking forward to hearing yours, Nicole. I mean, not
yeah,
for you to relive all that trauma, obviously, but because it was such a different experience than what me and Ashley had. So
so different.
it'll
Like,
be
so different.
interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk more, and maybe we'll get people eventually to share too their stories of like choosing C-section or VBAC for their, second births. But yeah, I guess we'll continue part 2 next time we talk, and Nicole can share, and then all three of us can get more in on like our hospital experience post birth.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for sharing, lady.
Yeah. No, it was therapeutic talking through it. So
It is. I'm like, oh,
Biggest
there's
thing.
so much more to say, but at least we have said some of it.
yeah.
See you in part 2.
Yay!